Thanks for joining us at Right On Replicas, where we're proud to bring you the best scale model kit reviews on the planet. This is the Curtis SB2C-4 Helldiver review. It's a 1/48 scale kit from Revell, number 85-5983. It's out of production now, but still available online at auction sites, etc. Now, this was a carrier-based dive bomber, and despite its size, it was actually faster than the SBD that it replaced, but neither the pilots nor aircraft carrier skippers seemed to like it that much. It had a reputation for difficult handling. Now, this is a Skill 3 Pro Modeler kit for advanced builders. It has 115 parts with some photo etch and clear pieces. It's about 9.5 inches long, 12 7/8 inches wide, and 3 1/8 inches high. The first thing that I do with my kits is wash them in some warm soapy water, rinse them off, and let them air dry. Construction starts with the front cockpit assembly, so remove all the parts you see here from the trees, and then clean up any parting lines and flash that you may find. Find that we're going to have to prep for some use of the photo etch parts. It comes with seat belts on the photo etch sprue, so we're going to remove those seat belts that are molded into the seats with a number 11 hobby knife and some sandpaper. For the rest of these pieces, I went ahead and applied some Toucher's Acryl Chromate Green to the main components and some flat black to the radios. Then, after all the parts had been painted and detailed and weathered, which consisted of painting the control stick grip flat black, the gear handle flat white, and some red dots on the top of the stick. And then I detailed all the wiring and hydraulic lines with a silver pencil. Now, to weather it, I used the same silver pencil by sanding it into a fine powder and then brushing it on all the parts. Now, it contains once again some photo etch parts for realism. And to remove the parts from the tree, I just use a sharp knife on a hard surface and then stick a piece of tape to the back of it so that the parts don't fly off. Some parts might also need to be sanded to fit quite properly. And to attach the pieces, use a toothpick or a piece of wire and apply a small amount of superglue to it, or 2-part epoxy, sometimes even clear enamel for flat parts. And then the photo etch piece can be put into place using some tweezers or toothpicks. Once the detail paint on the seat belts was dry, you can go ahead and glue that to the pilot seat using some super glue. I added some more detail to the photo etch parts, like the catches and the slip buckles, anchors, and the latches. They were trimmed with some aluminum, and then the leather backing was painted with a leather color. Now you can add those pieces and the seat to the cockpit. Now we'll gather up these parts to construct the observer gunner station. So remove all the parts from the trees, along with any parting line and flash that needs to be scraped off or sanded. All the parts with some of that acrylic chromate green, and then when that's dry, I painted the radios flat black and the ammo boxes were aluminum. Now all the parts have been weathered with the powdered pencil, as I mentioned before, and are ready to glue together. Once all the parts have been glued into place, you'll get something that looks like this on that particular battle station. Now the pilot and cockpit area there will be constructed, and I'm going to put the pilot together, but I won't use him because I want to be able to see those nice looking seat belts. So go ahead and get these parts out and then trim them off of any flash and ejector pin marks, etc. and get those ready for paint. You can see on the back of the pilot there and on some of the radio stacks there were some sinks or ejector pin marks, and I filled those with Squadron Products fast drying white putty. I sanded all the putty that had been applied and started painting, and I started with the radio stack, the instrument panel, and the tail hook, and they were painted flat black. The oil cooler and them was painted with chromate green, and the pilot's boots, gloves, and helmet were given some acrylic leather paint treatment, and the shirt and pants were khaki drab. Face and arms with some skin tone base light, and finally the life vest with some insignia yellow. After the radio stack dried, I applied some chromate green to the radio supports and shelves, and then some enamel chrome silver and Tamiya red for the switches and the wires, and finally some acrylic pale green to the radar. After the radar was dry, I applied a dab of floor polish to that to simulate a lens, and once the instrument panel had dried, I applied a coat of future floor polish. Now, this will allow the decal to seat properly. Unfortunately, this needs to dry overnight before applying the decal. The decal's been applied using some microsol, which softens the decal and allows it to nestle in. And after this dried overnight, I applied a coat of flat clear, followed by some detailing with some red, white, and blue paints to kind of bring out the switches and the levers. And after this had dried, I brushed the entire panel with some dry brushing with some silver pastel. Now you can see that everything is in place, including the pilot's instrument panel. And note the position of all the pieces, and especially here in the back, the radio stack and all the related equipment there. And those get glued into place at this time. Now we can place the two halves of the fuselage together and glue them into position and let them dry overnight. If you have some clamps that are light pressure, you can apply those to the exterior to keep those in alignment. Next up, we'll start working on the engine assembly. So remove all these parts from the trees and then carefully remove any parting lines or flash that exist. Next, we're going to paint the engine once it's assembled here with some acrylic flat black, and the crankcase and the air cleaner are neutral gray. Now after those have dried, just give them a dry brushing with silver and black pastels. And then the exhaust fairings were painted Testors Enamel Sea Blue, and exhaust stubs and the wire harnesses, that was painted steel color. Now we can glue the wire harness into position with some super glue. And at this point we're going to put all the parts aside until the fuselage gets painted and it's ready for final assembly. And that'll make masking the fuselage much easier. So we'll start there with the bomb bay doors, and we're going to remove once again these parts from the trees and clean them up. And then we're going to paint the bomb bay doors the chromate green on the inside and Testors Enamel Sea Blue on the outside. And set those aside to dry. Now the actuators there will get a treatment of flat black finish at the end of the struts and chrome green there at the very tips. Now when this is dry, I applied some chrome bare metal foil to the strut itself for a metallic appearance. I weathered the bomb bay doors and the actuators with some pastels and a silver pencil to make them look a little bit used, and at this point we're going to put all these parts away until the fuselage gets painted and ready for assembly. Gather up these parts from the kit and cut them off of the trees and clean up the parting lines and any flash. And then glue the bombs together using some liquid cement and a couple of light clamps to keep them in position. The displacement gear struts here are painted enamel intermediate blue. That's FS 35164 color code. And the seams on the bombs, those are going to be longitudinal through the whole thing. And then I sprayed this with some olive drab, followed by some weathering with some silver and black pastels. I also gave the displacement gear struts there a treatment of steel color towards the flat strut part of the unit. Now we can glue the bombs to the displacement equipment there, and using some liquid cement. And we're going to set these aside to dry as well. You see here the parts that we'll need now for the stabilizers and the wings, and we're going to remove all the parts from, clean those up, any flash, etc. And then we're going to glue the stabilizers together using some liquid cement and some clamps to keep them in position and remove any gaps. Paint the wheel wells and the wings with the chromate green color, and then you can see that some of this can be seen from the bomb bay also, so I made sure to get that sprayed too all around that area. Now I painted the wing flap pockets there with some Tamiya flat red paint. Locate the cannon barrels and then from the kit, and clean those up and paint them flat black. And then once they were dried, I just gave them a dry brush with some silver pastels. Glue the cannon barrels into the wing pockets there, and then go ahead and glue the wing halves together using plenty of clamps to make sure that the seams stay together and are eliminating any gaps. Now it's time to use some liquid cement and glue the wings and the horizontal stabilizers to the fuselage. Now fit the parts to the fuselage, but they're a pretty good fit, and they require just one spot to be filled to clean that up and make sure that you've got a nice even and uniform gap. Get these parts out of the kit. These are the struts, and then clean them up again, any flash, and paint the gear struts, the main drag truss, and the gear actuators with some of the chromate green. And once those were dry, I added some bare metal foil to the olio struts and the actuators, and then I weathered all the parts with some silver and black pastels. So at this point we're going to put these parts aside also until the fuselage is painted. Get the parts out for the wheel assemblies, and then glue them together with some liquid cement and a clamp and let those dry. Then once they're put together, we're going to spray the wheels with some of the chromate green, and then when that's dry, I actually chucked the tire wheel into my lathe and painted the tire with some Testors rubber. It's just a slow rotation so that you get a nice clean paint all the way around and avoid the rim. I added some weathering to the wheels with little silver and black pastels. You can see the silver makes it look more like worn metal and gives it a little more authenticity. Next we'll move into the door and rack assembly, and this includes the gear doors and some tenuate pieces here. So remove those from the trees and clean them up. And then we're going to paint the inside of the gear doors with some of the chrome green, and the outside of the gear doors, the rocket stubs, the cannon muzzles, the bomb racks, they get painted with Testors enamel sea blue. By the way, that's FS35042. And when dried, I painted the cannon muzzles with some flat black, and the bomb rack stabilizers some silver. Now the Yagi antenna was painted with metallizer aluminum, and all the parts then were weathered with some silver and black pastels for detail. So set these aside to dry. The parts for the flap assembly are needed next, and we're going to remove those from the trees, the plastic pieces and the PE pieces, and they're exquisite. They're really nice addition for this model. And we're going to paint the flaps and the slats with the flat red, and then it's followed on the underside with the sea blue. Now the pivot tube was also painted sea blue, but the tip of it with aluminum. Now the trim actuators are photo etch parts, and they were painted with aluminum as well. The flaps and the slats then were weathered, again with some of the silver and black pastels. We can move to the front canopy, and these are the parts required, so remove those from the tree and then trim them up. And I actually dip these in some of the future floor polish and then wick off the excess and let it dry. And then after that was done, I masked the windows off with some Tamiya tape and glued the windscreen then to the fuselage using some product called Micro Crystal Clear. It's a white glue that's pretty tacky, and it's perfect for this application, and it clears nice and dry. In about an hour after the paint had dried, I removed the masking tape and weathered the bolts on there with a little of the silver pastels. Round up the pieces for the fixed rear window, and again clean those up, and they are treated to, the clear parts are treated to the floor polish. Let that dry, and after that's done, tape the windows like we did in front, and with the masking tape, and leave of course the braces and framework so that we can paint that as the same manner as the front window. Let's put together the gun assembly now. and it comes with a couple of photo etch parts for nice realism. And the machine gun then was painted with flat black and weathered with silver pastels. The shields were painted chromate green and weathered with silver and black pastels. And once you've assembled it, as you see here, you can set that aside to dry. Let's continue with some of the support assemblies there for the gun and remove those from the trees and clean them up again. And there's also another little clear part here that gets treated to the floor polish trick. And after the future dried, mask the windows there with some Tamiya tape, and then glue the turtleback window to the fuselage using the crystal clear glue. Finally, assemble the rear seat. We're going to assemble that whole rear seat assembly and paint that with acrylic chromate green, followed by the weathering treatment, and glue the seat belts into the seat. Now the gun is just placed into position, so to check that for fit at this point, and we're just going to do a little sizing there to make sure it all works, and then set this aside for to dry till later. Let's work on the observer's window, and as you can see, there's quite a bit of framework on here, so it's going to take a certain amount of time, but go ahead and clean that up and then dip it into the future floor polish to make it nice and clear. And then go ahead and start your masking just like you see here. Use a nice sharp blade and take your time so that you've got good clean straight cuts. And then go ahead and we're going to spray that with the sea blue paint, and when that's dry after about an hour, you can remove the masking tape and then glue on the air deflectors using some of the crystal clear glue, and then once again weather the bolts, the assembly bolts there with some and the deflectors with some silver pastels. Time to work on the propeller assembly with the cowling there you see. So once again, remove these parts and clean them up. Get rid of any flash and parting lines. And when I paint the propellers, I always paint the tips first, and I use some of the Tester's acrylic insignia yellow for that. After that was done, and I tape the tips up, I mask them off, and then spray the prop with some acrylic flat black. Once the paint is dry with the blades there, I paint the hub with some aluminum paint, and then the inside of the cowl was painted with the chromate green, and then the front of the cowl was painted with some of the insignia yellow. Mask off the yellow on the cowl using some Tamiya tape, and then spray the cowl and the antenna mast with the sea blue paint, and then weather the cowl and the rest with some silver and black pastels. Next, I painted the propeller with a coat of floor polish on the prop blades, and that'll serve as a base for the decals that will go on later. Alright, now with most of the major subassemblies out of the way, we can start working on the fuselage. And as you see here, it's been carefully masked off with some Tamiya tape, and you can do the same. Just be patient, make sure you don't cover any surface that needs to be sprayed. And then I used a popsicle stick hot melted to the cowl of the airframe, and then I sprayed the whole thing, and I used that as a base to mount the thing for paint. And then I sprayed the whole thing with the sea blue paint. Once I painted the leading edge then of the slat pockets with Tamiya flat red, and then unmasked everything except for the cockpits and the glass. The bottom side was then unmasked and ready for a coat of clear gloss. So that was done, and you see here with the sheen on it that the clear coat was done on the entire airframe then for the rest of the body with the future floor polish through a spray gun. Now it's time to go ahead and decal the model, and use a tub with some warm water and replenish that, refresh that now and then so that the water stays warm. It actually helps take the water and penetrate the decal paper to lift it off and makes them a little more pliable. Also, we're going to use some of the microsol there, a solvent to help the parts nestle over any contours on the body. So when you get those in position, just dry them off with something soft, a cotton swab, etc. Don't wipe them, just dab them off, and then let those dry. And then they were applied again here to the flaps and the antenna as described above. And it's quite an intricate process, but use patience and you'll be able to get a satisfactory result. And don't forget that propeller. We had prepped that with some clear gloss, and so go ahead and add the 4 propeller decals there and let those as well as the rest of the decals dry overnight. After the decals have dried for at least an overnight period, in order to seal the decals in, we're going to give it another coat of the Future Floor polish to make sure that those stay put and stay down. And in addition, the prop antenna flaps and slats have been coated with another coat of the floor polish to seal the decals onto those as well. Now let the Future Floor polish dry overnight once again, and then apply a coat of Testors or your favorite brand compatible acrylic flat clear to the entire airframe, and then some flat clear also to the prop antennas, flaps, and slats that are still separate. Now the airframe finish is completed with some weathering, so hit the highlighted points, anything that's raised basically, with a silver pencil. Just lightly draw over the panel lines and then do one section at a time. And using a soft brush, you can brush some silver in the direction of airflow over the airframe as well. And for added effect, I rub a little of the silver pencil onto a piece of fine sandpaper, about 400 grit, pick up some of the sand dust, and then a paintbrush and apply it. And after this is complete, I brush the entire airframe again with some black pastels, and this tones it down a little bit to make it look more realistic. To weather the propeller, I use the same silver pencil, only I just bub the edge of the pencil along the leading edge of each blade to simulate wear. Then I brush some silver over each blade in the opposite direction the propeller turns. To simulate chipping, I chuck the blade into my lathe and turn it up and then to a medium speed and touch the silver pencil to the spinning prop. The effect is minimal, but it really helps make it look like actual weathering. You can do the same thing and just put it into any drill motor or a Dremel, etc. Just be careful that you don't make it run too fast. Finally, for finish here, we're going to do the same thing to the flaps and the slats. They get weathered just like the airframe does to match it to the weathering that appears there. Now we can start adding those sub-assemblies to the airframe. And just as a reminder, always remove any paint from areas that you want to glue to get a good bond. Now assemble the bomb bay doors, the engine, and the exhaust to the airframe. The landing gear was a little finicky, so I did this in stages. I glued the main gear legs into the wings. Then I turned the airframe right side up and positioned the gear until it was straight, and I let that dry overnight. The next morning, I attached the remaining gear parts and the rest of the components to that, and I didn't glue the canopies or propellers in place yet. I used some stretched sprue for the antenna wire, which I glued on with some superglue, and everything else was glued in using some liquid cement. Now the airframe itself is complete. So there you have it. The model is finished, and here's our pilot practicing his flying process. As we said before, we're not going to put him in just so we can show off that great looking cockpit area. But we are finished, and this is a great model, and with the PE kit parts that were available in the kit, it makes for a really nice looking model and display. And once again, it's a pro modeler, but everything fit and went together very well. It's just that there's a lot of detail and a lot of small parts, and of course a lot of decals. So that makes this a model for the advanced builder. But boy, when you're done, this is a really beautiful model. So if I were you, I'd buy one and put it on my shelf. Thanks for joining us. We hope you loved this premium step-by-step model kit review. And so that you don't miss any more, please subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can just click on our icon in the lower right hand of any video, and then we also invite you to see us on Facebook or our website, rightonreplicas.com. Thanks.